So I promised that I would do another one of these videos at some point, and today seemed like a good day because everything else that I've got planned is quite complicated and requires significant research, so I thought this would be a good video to record today. On Thursday, I've got a big interview coming up with two people that haven't been heard from in this space before, but are very credentialed, so I hope people are going to enjoy that. And I've planned and arranged several more interviews for the weeks to come, so they're going to be a regular feature on the channel for a while. Obviously, I don't know how many I'll be able to arrange, so it may become semi-regular at a point in the future, but my ideal would be to do them as regularly as possible. I think this is symptomatic of how many people are coming forward now. There are more and more credible, intelligent, qualified, experienced people that are coming forward to speak about Lucy's case. And I'm personally staggered by how many people are following me, how many doctors and how many nurses and how many scientists and how many credentialed people. Especially given that when I started this, I hadn't studied any science since about 1993, and that was my GCSEs at school. So I did pass chemistry, biology and physics, but I've always been more of an arts person than a science person, but I've always retained an interest in science. Like my friend, she always had science magazines in a car. She used to read them all the time, so I'd read all them, and I've always taken an interest in a wide variety of subjects, but science definitely, particularly medical matters, was definitely not my forte when I begun. So the fact that I've had good feedback from people who know a hell of a lot more than me is really nice. But I think we've reached the point now where every serious person who looks at the case concludes that it's an unsafe conviction. And I think that's for two reasons. The first reason is because there's very strong evidence pointing to the fact that it's an unsafe conviction. I think the second reason is that we're approaching a state of critical mass where the idea that Lucy Letby is not guilty gets passed on almost in a process of osmosis. However, as I've discussed in the last video of this nature that I made, there are still some groups of people that believe Lucy to be guilty. I think these can be split into four groups. The first one is people that don't know a great deal about the case. The second one is people who have a vested interest. And then the other two groups are more interesting to me. It's people who've made an ego or psychological investment in a certain position. And the last one is people who have an unshakable faith in the system. So I'm going to come on to discuss the last group imminently, but I just want to say firstly that when I say people who've made an ego or psychological investment in a certain position, I don't mean that critically. That is something that we all do. Everyone has, unless you're just a completely nihilistic person who doesn't care about anything, who doesn't have an opinion on anything, there's not many people like that around. Most people have certain principles and certain views that inform their worldview. And the more that we come to believe something, and particularly when it's an important opinion that is part of our identity to a certain extent, the more we invest in that position, both with our ego and psychologically, and therefore it can be very difficult to extricate ourselves from that position. I always bring up the Flat Earth Society as an example of this, which I don't mean to bash people that believe in a flat Earth. They're not hurting anyone, but that is, I watched this program, or I think it was a YouTube video where a guy attended the Flat Earth Society, and he's a very open-minded person. I saw him look at other controversial subjects where people have controversial views, and he was very receptive towards what they had to say. But he went to the Flat Earth Society being open-minded, but, wanting to be convinced. And their arguments were not that convincing, frankly. But of course, it'd be very difficult now for them to anyone that's part of the Flat Earth Society, it's very difficult for them to climb down from that position and say, you know what, the Earth probably is an imperfect sphere. It makes a lot more sense in many ways. So that's an extreme example, perhaps because that's something that few people believe. But we all have... I was trying to think earlier of an example for myself. I'm sure I have treasured beliefs that if they were to be challenged, I would be resistant. I can't think of any at the moment. I suppose skeptics and cynics would say Lucy Letby not being guilty would be one of them, and that would not necessarily be an unfair comment. The problem is, in my estimation, all the evidence is pointing to her being not guilty. So there's not going to be a challenge to that position. But I'm sure I've had beliefs in my life. I've had beliefs about certain things, and they've changed. I can't immediately bring any to mind, but I'm sure I've had political beliefs or beliefs about certain subjects, and over a period of time, I've had to evolve my belief because I've realised, well, I'm wrong. But that's never easy to do, and as I say, the more treasured that belief is, the harder it is because you make that psychological investment, and then it becomes difficult to extricate yourself. But the group of people I want to talk about today, along with many other topics, is people who have an unshakable faith in the system. Now, there are numerous reasons for this. I'm going to come on to one of the most important reasons in a second. But the first reason is, if you have faith in something, and then that faith is challenged, then you experience cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is this kind of crisis state of mind whereby your belief system or important aspects of your belief system are being challenged. And that causes us to go into a kind of crisis state where our brain tries to process this and can't process it. So recently for me, and I have to be a bit euphemistic about this because I cannot tell you what I'm referring to, but something happened to a friend of mine that was truly shocking, devastating, in fact. And my friend is perfectly okay, so you don't need to worry about that. But this information was an absolute hammer blow. I mean, it was a bombshell, truly. And when I learnt about it, she was not able to speak to me that day. So I said, I just tried to sleep on it. And it was just one of those things where I had to speak to her to process it. So I said, I'm really busy at the moment. I don't know when I'll be able to speak to you, but I'll try to speak to you as soon as I can. I had to speak to her the next day and talk about it for an hour just so we could process it. And I've started to process it now. I don't think I've completely processed it. And I can't really make any more reference to it than that because it's very serious. And my brain just... It's not quite the same thing as true cognitive dissonance, but I couldn't compute what I'd been told, essentially. And that's at the essence of what cognitive dissonance is. It's an idea that you encounter new information that challenges your existing worldview. Typically, it's challenging your existing worldview, or it could be challenging a belief. And you just can't process it because it goes so strongly against the grain of what you believed until that point in time. So I understand why people wish to have faith in the system. And I understand if they've grown up with that belief and that is then challenged in some significant way, that can be quite a traumatic process in many ways. Obviously, for the parents of these infants, that is amplified 1,000-fold, 1,000,000-fold, who knows how much. And it becomes incredibly difficult for them to be open to the idea that their belief about Lucy Letby being the guilty party and essentially an evil person may not be well founded. It's going to be very difficult for them, and many of the parents, it's quite probable, will never change their mind because they've gone through an enormously traumatic experience and now their belief system is associated with that trauma. So for them to revisit that and change their mind, it takes a very strong person. And it takes a person that is used to going through the process that I've described already, through this cognitive dissonance, and coming out of the other end with a changed belief or a changed belief system even. And not many people are strong enough to do that. But the other major aspect of this is that we're obviously raised to a greater or lesser extent to accept the status quo and to believe in the system. There's all kinds of class and social and the kind of outlook and perspective of the parents can influence this to a great deal as well. But you don't take a 4-year-old child and say to them, oh, guess what, Tommy? The world's a really corrupt place and the systems that we all rely on to keep us safe are not necessarily run in an equitable or competent fashion. Obviously, you don't say that to a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old because, once you're starting to understand language, at whatever age that begins, because you're warping their mind, and it's just not seen as the right thing to do typically, even though it's honest. And then later on, you reflect on this, you look back, and I do think in a way that you should try to be as honest as possible, because later on it can cause a lot of problems when you realise the world is very different from how you were told when you were younger. But it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, to know what to do, and I wouldn't even begin to purport to know what the answer is. But I don't know if you know the Keane song "Somewhere Only We Know." So this song is, it's not a particularly deep song, I suppose, but I do think it's quite a clever song. But it's really about how, as you get older, you get further and further away from that feeling of security and certainty that you have about the world when you're a child. And then you're kind of searching for it as you get older, but then you can never find it again. There's another song, there's one of the songs on The Suburbs by Arcade Fire that is very similar, about walking through the suburbs of where you grew up, which I've never done since I moved away. I sometimes look online on Google Maps and look at it and think, wow, how did we play football in that little space? Like, it's nowhere near big enough, and you have certain memories associated with that area. It'd be interesting to go back now. Maybe I will one day, but this is something that we all experience, and perhaps I do think we should try to be as honest with children as possible. But you can't be brutally honest about how unstable the world is. I grew up, for example, in the shadow of the Cold War, and I was just reading an article this week about Threads, the nuclear war drama that was set in Sheffield. I don't know if everyone's heard of it, who's listening to this. Probably won't be as well known for listeners outside of UK and Ireland. Maybe even some people from UK and Ireland haven't heard of it, but it was a very kind of socially realistic documentary that was made about there being a nuclear attack on Britain, and they picked Sheffield for the city to depict, which I think was a very astute decision, because everything's always set in London, and to actually see a different community being depicted, I think made it a lot more memorable in many ways. But this was, obviously, it's a very devastating drama. I also loved the animated film When the Wind Blows. I used to be obsessed with that when I was a kid. And also the film War Games, where there's very nearly a nuclear war. I was a very morbid child in many ways, but I don't know why, but I was fascinated by nuclear war. To me it was natural, because it's like there's these weapons that can just blow everyone up. And I was kind of fascinated as a child as to why adults didn't seem that bothered about it. Of course, now I understand that they're trying to block out the possibility that there could have been a Cold War. It looked like a very distinct possibility, even when I was younger. That is what Threads is about. Threads presents a very realistic scenario of what could have been a nuclear war at that time, involving Russia, involving the United States, involving Britain, and involving Iran, I believe, if I remember rightly. And there's some tension. Some could say it could even happen now. I don't know if people know this, but during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we came extremely close to there being a nuclear war. I may not have been here, because that was well before I was born. And it was just one general who was called Arkhipov. There was some mix-up, essentially. This has been depicted in films in other ways, but they were on a nuclear submarine. There was a mix-up. They were getting very close to firing nuclear weapons. If Soviet Union had fired nuclear weapons, there probably would have been a full-scale nuclear war. And one general blocked it, said, look, we need to double-check this. They did later checks, and they found out, whoops, we're wrong. And it never happened. But that kind of that hung over me when I was younger, this idea that there could be a nuclear war, and if there's a nuclear war, we're not going to survive. I think Threads presents an optimistic scenario, because the human race survives, but it goes into a kind of feudal society, and there are obviously massive social, organisational, health problems, etc., and the population is massively reduced. I still think that is an optimistic scenario for the level of nuclear weapons that depicted being fired in that film, because I can't see any way that the water supply just wouldn't be fatally poisoned and everyone would just die of dehydration or nuclear poisoning or both. Anyway, this is all getting a bit bleak, so I'll move on. The point is that when I was younger, this was hanging over us all the time. But obviously, my mum's not going to sit there and go, oh, well, any day now we're probably going to get blown up by the Soviet Union. So, she tried to bring me up to be happy, and she tried to bring me up to be well-adjusted. It's just that I'm strange and was very interested in nuclear war as a child. So typically, people are brought up with a kind of prevailing belief in the system to a greater or lesser extent. And as you get older, that begins to fall apart for some people. So, and really, it should... Not that I'm saying you should lose complete faith in all social systems and in all political systems and in the infrastructure of the country. I'll come back to discussing that later on. But if you have witnessed something like the Hillsborough Disaster, for example, and the aftermath of the Hillsborough Disaster, so not everyone knows this, but this is documented and is a fact. At the time of the Hillsborough Disaster, for people that don't know from other countries, this was this happened during a football match or a soccer match, FA Cup semi-final held at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. A lot of bad things happened in Sheffield with threads being filmed there as well. But was it 98 died? Was it 97? 97 Liverpool football supporters died in a crush because the police made fundamental mistakes. What a lot of people don't know about that is that at the time there were a lot of negative articles saying, oh, the Liverpool fans were all drunk. Lots of negative articles were placed in the press, most memorably the Sun newspaper, saying that it was all the fault of the supporters. And we only learnt relatively recently that it was only a few people in key positions, few people in the government, literally a couple of very high-ranking people got together, high-ranking person in the police, and they decided to seed the media with these articles to try and influence public opinion. And this came from the highest points of the British government. That's known to be the case, that's not contentious in any way. And it took decades, partly because of that, for there to be any justice at all, and for the government to finally apologise, and for there to be question marks. Now, the police clearly made massive mistakes on the day. I don't say that the police acted in bad faith, but they clearly made massive errors. However, they have faced no consequences for that whatsoever. And just here I've got an article in front of me, 12th of March 2025. Anyone can look at this on the BBC website. No misconduct case for Hillsborough Police, IOPC. While police officers tried to deflect blame after the Hillsborough disaster, they do not have a misconduct case to answer, a watchdog has told families. And so it goes on. So, essentially, we saw the police here behaving in a similar way to Cheshire Police are behaving now, where they acted in self-interest. And it says here in this article, our investigations did find evidence to support allegations that in the aftermath of the disaster, South Yorkshire Police sought to deflect the blame from themselves. We found no evidence to support claims that the behaviour of supporters was a contributing factor. Despite the wider public interest to gain answers about what happened, South Yorkshire Police was entitled, within the law at that time, to present its best case and be selective with the evidence it presented. So let me repeat that for you again. Despite the wider public interest to gain answers about what happened, South Yorkshire Police was entitled, within the law at the time, to present its best case and be selective with the evidence it presented. So we're now seeing exactly the same thing occur in the Lucy Letby case, whereby Cheshire Police will now do everything they possibly can to defend themselves and do everything they possibly can to defend the prosecution. And as far as I understand it, they can do that and not be found guilty of misconduct, because the argument that's made here is that the law at the time of Hillsborough meant that they're perfectly entitled to do that. And then later in this article it says, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer pledged to bring forward a Hillsborough law which would include a legal duty of candour by the disaster's next anniversary. So that was on the 24th of September 2024. So whether that could affect Lucy's case, we'll have to wait and see. There's a possibility that it could. But the point is, no one has been held account for Hillsborough. Certainly the police haven't been held account. And it's all essentially been... There was a bit of an apology. There's been a couple of embarrassing moments for government ministers. But really, everyone's just got off scot-free. Despite the fact that 97 people died. Despite the fact that approximately... I believe the capacity of Hillsborough at that time was 50,000-ish, so certainly tens of thousands of people witnessed this disaster. It was a disaster waiting to happen because there were problems in previous years at the FA Cup semi-final, and yet nothing really has been done. And there was a false perception of this story that came through the media that occurred because a few people in high places seeded the media with false stories, and that then coloured the public perception of that issue for many years, and it consequently took decades to get anything even approaching justice for the families, and even then they didn't really get proper justice anyway. So once you're aware of something like that, once you've witnessed something like that, I don't understand how you could continue to have such unshakable faith in the system. And then on top of that, there've obviously been multiple high-profile miscarriages of justice recently. In fact, just yesterday, there was an article talking about the Criminal Cases Review Commission and how it's not fit for purpose. And then there was a link to another article. I believe this was related to Peter Sullivan, and the lawyer of Peter Sullivan was saying this will happen again, there'll be more miscarriages of justice, there'll be major miscarriages of justice, etc., etc. So none of this exactly fills you full of faith in the criminal justice system. So this could actually be positive for Lucy, the recent miscarriage of justice and emphasis on that and the questioning of the CCRC. This could all help Lucy's bid for freedom sooner rather than later. But despite the fact that there have been these problems in the system, we've had issues such as Hillsborough that I've mentioned, despite that fact, as I say, there is still a group of people that have an unshakable faith in the system, and I would count members of my family among that. And I do think that partly it's a defence mechanism, but I also read this article. Well, unfortunately, it's not actually on the internet anymore. And it's essentially, I can forget what the question was exactly, but the person that gave the top ranked answer on Quora, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's spelled Quora. There's various discussions and debates on there. It's kind of like Reddit, except people tend to write longer answers, I suppose, and there's less interaction between the various posts, but people will sometimes give essay-length answers to these questions. So I forget what the question was, but it was something to do with it, intelligent people and less intelligent people, or open-minded people and less open-minded people, something of that nature. And the top ranked answer was saying, I think that he or she was saying, if you'd have asked me this question a year ago, I would have said there isn't a fundamental difference between intelligent people and less intelligent people. And then he said, since then I've spent a lot of time around less intelligent people, and I realised that there's a massive difference, and I realised that before I just used to mix with intelligent people, and so I got a completely false impression. And what he said in the article was, less intelligent people don't share the curiosity of more intelligent people, so they're just not curious about things. So they're happy to just live in a... Then one of the things he said was they're not as good at thinking, so naturally they don't want to use a skill they're not very good at. So they're perfectly happy in their bubble, and then if they don't need to know something, they just think, well, I've got through life without knowing this so far, why do I need to know this now? But he said for more intelligent people, learning is just a fun activity for them. So consequently, curiosity naturally follows, and then they gain more knowledge, and then they enjoy the process of gaining knowledge, and then they see how that knowledge benefits them. And so naturally, more intelligent people tend to question things more. I personally don't like the term intelligent, because I don't think intelligence exists. I think there are various types of cognitive ability and cognitive processes, and I think we all have different levels of ability in those various fields. So I'll give you an example of this. So years ago, I nearly became an air traffic controller, and I didn't in the end, thankfully, and I'm really glad I didn't, because the shift pattern is an absolute nightmare, and it was probably a good decision. But during the training or the interview process, selection process for being an air traffic controller, I had to go and do some tests, and this is like the second part of the process or something. It's quite a long process. And I remember sitting down to do this 30-minute test or whatever it was. And the first part was verbal, like it was a verbal test and numbers test. And I was pretty good at these things when I was younger. And I remember sitting down and starting to do the test, and I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Like, this is an insult. This is so easy. And I just remember I didn't even need to think. I just rattled through it. And I remember looking around, because I finished like half the time. It didn't even use half the time on it. And I looked around, and everyone else is like beavering away. I'm like, oh, come on. I mean, this I could have done this when I was like 8 or 9. Anyway, if I was going to allow that to go to my head, later in the day, I had a rude awakening, because later, so we're carrying on, everything's going okay, and then the later test, the last test I did, and I remember it so clearly. There was like a picture of a cube with patterning on the sides of the cube, if you can imagine. So instead of it being like a dice, there was patterns on it, and then it was multiple choice questions. And you had the nets of a cube. So, you fold the net up into a cube and it creates a cube. There were the nets, and the nets had patterns on. And you had to say which one of the nets would make the cube that you'd been given. And I'd never realised this before I did this particular test. But I think I have like a 9 or 10-year-old proficiency in that skill. So I just I couldn't hold the picture in my head, and I just couldn't work. I could do the very, very easiest ones, but I was going through it, and I was like, this is just. It was frying my brain, literally. I just couldn't think about it in the right way, and I got about half. I think I got maybe it wasn't even halfway through it, but it was. And they obviously get harder as you go along, and I thought, well, bollocks to this. I can't even do the easy ones very well. There's no way I'm going to be able to do the harder ones. So I think when I got about 40 to 45% of the way through it, I just thought, well, I'll just guess from here, because I'm never going to finish anyway. So I might as well just go B, C, A, D. So I did that all the way to the end, and just, with a few minutes to go, and make sure I'd answered all the questions. I thought, I'll probably get as many right answers anyway from doing that as actually trying to work it out. And so I realised at that point that there's no such thing as unified intelligence. There's various skills that you have. And I've always been good at English and maths from a very young age, but I'm not good at. I can remember as well playing concentration with my brother. So this is a game where you turn cards over and try to make pairs. My brother was absolutely mustard at that game. I never beat him once. I remember drawing with him a couple of times, but he must have beat me 98% of the time we played. And I think the problem is I can't hold a visual image in my head. Because I don't think in images, I think in words, and I just cannot. Like, I play chess, and that's a problem with me in chess. Like, I'm a pretty good chess player, decent, but at a certain point when you play chess, you have to think, right, well, that goes there, then my opponent will go there, then I could go there, and so the position that you have on the board is gone, and you have to hold the position in your head that you're imagining to try and assess, would that be good for me, would that be bad for me? And very, very strong chess players can do this very easily, and they can play the whole game blindfolded. There's a video online that you should look at. It's quite entertaining. It's like Magnus Carlsen, who's the best chess player in the world, playing multiple games blindfolded, and not only playing them blindfolded, but that's something a lot of players can do who are very strong, but they will go from one board to the next board to the next board. Whereas in this demonstration, this experiment, he's allowing players to move. So they'll go board 1, knight to f3, and he'll give a move. Board 3 has moved now, and so he can flick between the boards in his head, holding all 4 boards into position in his mind, and then still beat all the players. And for a really strong chess player, okay, not many people can do that. That is impressive, but they can play one game blindfolded in their head, no problem. I just simply cannot do that, and it doesn't matter how long I would train to do it. I just do not have the capability of doing it. Whereas a lot of people who are listening to this who maybe never played chess, you might think that sounds impossible, but if you practiced enough, you would probably be able to do it. It's not like a massive percentage of people that can do it, but if you have the visual acuity, then you're able to do it. So anyway, I don't like this demarcation between like intelligent and less intelligent, but I do think there is a divide between people that have this curiosity and open-mindedness to question things and those that don't. And I think the underlying factor for this can often be a precipitating event that happens earlier in your life. So what makes someone a person that questions the status quo, that questions the system, that doesn't just want to go along with things, that does sometimes that's willing to stick their neck out? And what's the characterizing factor of someone that doesn't want to do that and does want to go along with the system and wants to believe in the system and is not skeptical or cynical about it or questioning? And I think often it's a precipitating event. It's something that happens often in childhood, but it can be in adulthood as well. But I'd say often it's in childhood that either informs their worldview from that point forward or changes the way that they look at things. So for me, I may have been naturally inclined towards this anyway, and it may have happened, but I think my precipitating event was when I was in an arcade in Skegness when I was about 7 years old. Oh no, I might have been slightly older than that. I might have been 8 or 9. But I remember I was standing with my dad and we were watching someone play the arcade game Dragon's Lair. So I never used to play Dragon's Lair because it's an incredibly difficult game and it was very expensive and I didn't used to want to waste my money because my mum never used to give me very much because she didn't like being in the arcade, which was entirely reasonable. But to just explain very briefly, Dragon's Lair was a very early Laserdisc game that had amazing graphics for the time, and you had to rescue a princess from a castle, from a dragon's lair, as the name would suggest. And the princess in that game sounded very much like Marilyn Monroe. And I remember my dad saying, oh, they killed her because she knew too much. Now, I don't know whether there's any truth in that whatsoever, but that was quite an interesting thing for my dad to say. And I just remember that so vividly. And I think my dad was always, like, he was a trade unionist. He was in the trade unions as a teacher, and he was very political. He read a lot of newspapers. Obviously, he was an English teacher. He was head of an English department. It's not terribly difficult to see why I turned out the way that I did, and why I turned out to be a writer as well. So I think the foundation was there anyway, but I think my dad was an enormous influence on me and my way of thinking. My mum's side of the family is absolutely nothing like that whatsoever. They're the complete opposite. So if I'd have just had the influence of my mum's family, I might be completely different to what I am now. So all these environmental influences can have a big impact on you. Another thing that I learned from my dad that's just come to mind. So I'll just go over this for a minute because I think you'll find this interesting. So my dad was a very talented person. My dad got a very good degree, first class degree, I think a double first, whatever that means. I don't even know what it means, but I know it's good. And he was exceptional in virtually every respect. And also he played sport very, very well. So he was on the books of Nottingham Forest and the books of Nottinghamshire County Cricket Club when he was younger. And he had more chance of making it in cricket than football. He was a wicket-keeper batsman. At the time, the wicket-keeper batsman for Nottinghamshire was the West Indies Test cricket first-choice wicket-keeper, I believe. So that means that Nottinghamshire's first-choice keeper was an international cricketer. So he didn't have an immediate opportunity to play in the first team. And his mother, my grandmother, who's sadly no longer with us, well, she died quite a long time ago. This would never happen today, but she didn't want him to go into cricket, which was a potentially risky venture, not as glamorous as it is now, not as well paid necessarily as it is now. She wanted him to get a steady job and start earning money. So she convinced him, even though he could have gone and signed a contract with Notts, he just went to work for the council. Now, no one would make that decision today, but he regretted that for the rest of his life. And he never ever told me this, and I never knew until he got drunk one night at a barbecue. And he never said it directly, but he said some stuff, and I realised, oh my God, you really regret the fact you stopped playing cricket. I'm sure he was glad that he had a family and all that, but he never knew. He never knew whether he would have been good enough or not. And so another life lesson I learned at that moment was, don't die wondering. Never die wondering. You know, if there's something you want to do, or if there's something you're passionate about, then do it, whatever it is. Even if it's something like going up to a girl that you like. I mean, I used to be very shy when I was younger, and then over time I got a little bit better at doing stuff like that. But there's quite a famous quote from a poem, and it goes, "For all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been." And I think my dad lived never knowing what might have been. Like, he played club cricket, and he played cricket with the like teachers that he used to work with. Of course, he used to absolutely batter the bowling all over the place. Like, he used to, because I mean, I was quite good at sport. I played like tennis at national level when I was younger, and we used to play cricket in the garden. And I can say I never got my dad out once. I was so bloody good, I couldn't get him out. He'd say, "Oh, that was a really good ball," as it came right out the middle of his bat every time. And so, and he never know. He'll never know whether he was good enough. So that's kind of a life lesson for you. But it's also why I'm working on Lucy's case, because I could have carried on what I was doing before. So before I was a ghostwriter, and I'd written and edited about 50 books, and I wouldn't go as far as to say it was lucrative, but I was comfortable with what I was doing. And you know, it's not easy to forge a career writing books. It's pretty difficult, and I was fortunate enough that I'd managed to do that. And then I heard about this case by accident on the radio on a day that I would have been working on something. I was in my study, and I just came downstairs, heard on the radio that this had happened, and became very curious immediately, thinking this could be a miscarriage of justice. And I was very quickly convinced that it was. So at that time, I was working on a really big project, really big ghostwriting project, and the person whose book that is could become very famous indeed if he fulfills all his ambitions. And the person who wrote the foreword for that book is extraordinarily famous now. And I was working on that book at the time, and I just realised I have to abandon doing this and I have to work on Lucy's case. So I arranged for my work to be passed over to someone else, and I just stopped doing it. So that would have been quite a good working opportunity, obviously, and it would have been quite a lot more lucrative than what I'm doing now. But I just realised that if I didn't do something for Lucy's case, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. I didn't expect to become as centrally involved as I have, but I just knew, once I knew it was a miscarriage of justice, which I believed since within a few hours of first researching it, I already thought it's likely this is a miscarriage of justice. Then once I started to see the science, I was like, I'm very certain this is a miscarriage of justice. And stuff that I wrote on Reddit at that time, I absolutely stand by today. I mean, I was reading some of it recently, and I hardly would change anything that I wrote. And that was within days of learning about this case. So all I wanted from that point was to be able to make a contribution and be able to do something. Like, I know I've got certain skills, and I just wanted to help and to be able to know that I'd made a contribution and that I'd done the best that I could, whatever that was. I didn't know what that would look like at that time, but I knew very, very early on, there's been enough times in my life, and I'm sure everyone has experienced this who's listening to this, where you're very passionate about something and you can do absolutely bugger all about it. I'm sure everyone has been in that situation. I mean, I mentioned the Cold War earlier on. I couldn't really do a great deal about the Cold War. It was just something that was hanging over us at that time. There's many geopolitical issues and other social issues you experience, and you just can't do anything. And I thought with this, I think I can do something. I don't know what I can do. I don't know how big an impact it will have. But this is, yes, it's big. There's a lot of powerful organisations involved. It's a big deal. But we're not talking about something at the geopolitical level. It's relatively small compared to that. And I feel I could do something. Now, I didn't know what would happen to me or what has happened to me since then, obviously. But I just thought, I need to find out. I need to know this case inside out. I need to research inside out. I need to know everything that I possibly can. And I need to try and not. I don't know if I don't want to use the term centrally involved, like it's an ego thing, but I wanted to just make the biggest contribution that I possibly could. And I also realised that because over the previous 12 years, I worked really, really hard on writing. So when you start, I quit my job. I had a normal office job, so I quit that job, and then everyone told me. When I quit my job, I think the general consensus was I'd just go back with my tail between my legs and beg for my old job back. Like there's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer does that after he's been working in a bowling alley. And I think they all thought, oh, you're going off to do writing on the internet. Oh yeah, good luck. And they weren't horrible about it, but people were not encouraging at all. No one encouraged me in the slightest. And, there were a few disparaging remarks. They've gone quiet recently. They don't say that so much now. So I believed I could do it, and I realised that if I didn't try, I'd never know. I would die wondering about what would have happened. There's a book by Valentino Rossi, who was a world motorcycling champion. It's his autobiography, and I believe the title of the book is "Imagine If I'd Never Tried." And just think how easily, he could have looked at motorcycling and thought, that looks a bit dangerous. They're bombing around the track and then they look at what they do with the bike where they lean it over when they go around the corners. I'm not doing that. And he never would have known. He could have gone on to just do a normal job, and not there's anything wrong with that, of course. I done my fair share of normal jobs, but I'm sure he's glad that he became a motorcycling world champion. And if you don't try, you don't know. And that was very much what motivated me to become a writer or try. But I was just confident I will give it absolutely everything. If I have to work 365 days a year, I'll do it until I make it. And I remember the first year. So when I started out, I didn't write books. I did anything I could, anything, as long as it wasn't unethical. And I remember in the first year, I made more money than I ever had in a job. And I thought, that's it. I'm never going back. You're never going to see me again. And then I just slowly graduated onto different things, and then eventually did ghostwriting. So because I worked so hard for 12 years, about 12, 13 years, until I started to work on Lucy's case, I realised that I was then in a position that where I had a bit of security, although I've given up like countless jobs and I don't know how much in earnings, but tens of thousands. I wouldn't like to say exactly, but it's a lot. I just gave all that up because I realised that I needed to do this, and it's the most important thing I'm ever going to do in my life, obviously. And I knew I was in a position to do it, whereas other people that may want to do it. I spoke to someone on the phone today. I won't say who it was, but it'll be known to many of you. And he was saying that he'd love to write a book about it, but he just has not got the time. I knew that I had the time, and I thought, if I don't do it, it may not get done, and I'm in the position to do it, so I should do it. This was after a year of doing research. It was always in the back of my mind, should I write a book, but I thought it needs to be at the right time. So eventually I decided to do it. So I think another thing that you have to realise, so I've received an enormous amount of praise for my channel, which is really heartwarming and a beautiful thing and a lovely feeling and experience to have. But people should know that, I do firstly have a certain amount of natural talent, but also, I spent 12 years refining this skill of research and writing. When I'm making YouTube content, I'm leaning very, very heavily on that. And I was always writing and researching before I did it professionally. But it's 10, I'm sure you've heard about the 10,000 hours theory. I've done tens of thousands of hours of practice. If I said 30,000 hours, I'm sure I spent 30,000 hours reading, writing, researching before I even started this channel. I'm sure I have. So if you kind of reach a level of proficiency in something, it doesn't happen for an accident. It's because you worked really hard on it to get good. It's like when you watch people play sport, they have practiced and sacrificed a lot to get to where they are. So I realised when I became a writer, I needed to sacrifice things in my life, so I sacrificed everything. I've had a bit of a social life. I've been on a few holidays occasionally. I've done a little bit of travelling. I've been on some days out with my friends sometimes. I do like to go out for a restaurant meal, although I've learnt to cook quite well in recent years, and I like cooking now. But nevertheless, I sacrificed absolutely everything else, basically, because I really wanted to be a writer. So when I started to do this, I've already prepared to do that, and I'd already trained to do that, so it wasn't really a problem. So yeah, at this point in time, firstly to know that I am in a position now, with the platform that I have, with the kind of following that I have, and with the people that I've been connected with, to make a contribution, and like a significant contribution. I don't want to over egg what I'm doing, but I know it's a significant contribution, is really nice, and that's all I wanted to be able to do. And as long as I'm able to do that, I'll give everything that I possibly can to this case, because not only do I feel an enormous amount of sympathy and empathy for Lucy, but this will just happen all over again. If we don't expose this, and if we don't overturn this, one thing we're great at in Britain is brushing things under the carpet. If they gave out Olympic gold medals for brushing things under the carpet, we'd be at the top of the medals table every year, or every time they hold the Olympics. We can't allow that to happen, because this kind of miscarriage of justice will just occur again with someone else. Probably be another nurse, but there'll certainly be... We not only do we need to exonerate Lucy, but there needs to be a reform of the system. That's very clear. That's crystal clear to me. So we'll work on this indefinitely until we get to where we need to be, and that will just mean the rest of my life, realistically, because once we've exonerated Lucy, there's a lot more to do, and I've got some other ideas for things I'd like to do, so I will be doing that over a period of time. I've got ideas for several other books that I'd like to write, so I will steadily work on those when Lucy's out of prison, or I may even write some of the books or start to work on research or whatever before that. I don't know, but all I can say is that I will do whatever I possibly can in this field and use my voice for good for the rest of my life. And I definitely won't be disappearing with regards to Lucy's case. I'll be here. You'll be able to count on me indefinitely, as long as it takes. And hopefully that's going to be sooner rather than later, but we don't know what the time frame is. No one knows. So we've just got to keep plugging away and see what happens. In terms of having a community of people that follow you, it's a I wish everyone could experience it, it's like such a beautiful thing. It's really, really gratifying, and to see the same people coming back for videos over and over again, or even when, recently a few people have said, I've just found the channel, I've just subscribed, and said nice things. It's such a lovely thing to have. It's really hard to put into words what it means. It's the first time in my life I've really had strong support from people, and it really does mean a lot, because I can only do something, and I can only make a contribution, and I can only help Lucy with the help of others. I can't do it on my own. This has to be a community effort and a team effort from thousands of people, eventually affecting millions of people. That's what is necessary. So there can be no one person that is central to this. It really is about everyone. So and I knew I had very meagre expectations of my channel, but when I started, I knew if I'm going to achieve anything at all, I'll need support. That's obvious. And the support has so much exceeded my expectation that, it's really humbling. And I feel an enormous amount of gratitude for it. And I won't change. As someone said, gave me some advice the other day, which I heeded, but I really do very actively practice gratitude and humility. I've never been very good at meditation, but when I did meditate, when I have done meditation, I always do gratitude meditation, and I do actively practice these things, because, we live in a dark world in many ways, but there's still so much to be thankful for. I mean, the fact that you're alive, every day is a gift. You just never know what's going to happen. You never know what's around the corner. When I was when I was younger, when I'm saying younger, like it was ages ago, it wasn't that long ago, it was 7 or 8 years ago, a friend of mine, her mother died of cancer. I'll try not to cry at this point. I don't think I will, because I've told this story quite a few times. And she was very young for this to happen. And her mum was younger than I am now, quite a bit younger. And it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating, truly, because it dragged on, obviously, for quite a long time. And there was a point when my friend, her mother went back into hospital. She'd been at home and she went back into hospital. And I knew she was going to die. And my friend hadn't obviously accepted this yet and was hoping she'd get better. And I knew she wasn't going to. So we're having a conversation about this through text. You know, I've gone back to hospital. The moment she said, my mum's gone into hospital, I was like, she's not going to make it. It was truly devastating. And then, you know, I got the text, my mum passed away. It was very upsetting. And I'm not gonna cut this out. I could re-record this, but I'm not gonna cut it out. So it's moments like that you realise every day is a gift. You know, every day you wake up and you're breathing, it's a gift. So I think when you experience something like that, it does bring you a lot of humility. And I just remember as well, it'll be really hard for me to say this, but I'll try. But I remember I was listening to cricket on the radio, and there was a feature on it about... So there's a guy in Australia called Glenn McGrath, who's a great bowler, one of the best cricketers ever to play for Australia, and his wife died of cancer very young. And then at the time, Jonathan Agnew, who's the cricket correspondent for the BBC, who was also a good cricketer, played international cricket, his wife was suffering from cancer. And they were talking about this, and Andrew Strauss as well, whose wife, he captained England at cricket, his wife died of cancer. So they were having a kind of conversation, I believe it was the three of them. And that was the first time I just sobbed. And it was, I just realised there'd be a point where my friend was told, your mum's not going to get better. She's gone. Yeah, I had to cheat and edit that bit. So, yeah, so I just cried and cried and cried. I just realised I'd felt sad about it for a while, obviously, but I've realised ever since that experience that, you know, every day is a gift. So I always practice gratitude and I always practice humility for everything that happens to me, but I couldn't be more grateful for the support that I've received. And, you know, I didn't really plan this episode out. I just thought I'd talk off the top of my head because I'm not bad at doing that. But I just feel like occasionally it's a weird thing. It's a weird thing when you've got a community because, you know, you start out at first and you're just recording videos about Lucy Letby's case as you should. And, you know, it's not a topic where you really give much of yourself, or you shouldn't. You should focus on the topic in hand. But when I first made one of these videos, I thought, I can give a little bit more of myself this time. And then today I thought, well, I can give a bit more. People know me a little bit better now, so I can give a little bit more. But it is really nice to have the support. One of the things it's made me reflect on is how weird it must be to be like properly famous. That must be incredibly strange. Because even at the last meeting I went to in Hereford, I hadn't put my face on camera at that point, and I still had like loads of people come up to me and recognise my voice. So I'm assuming the next time it's going to be quite a lot more people are going to recognise me. And then imagine what it's like if that happens to you all the time. You know, I saw this thing with Roger Federer once where he's walking through an airport, and they had to just... It wasn't a private jet. He was just flying first class or something like that, I think. And they had to just cordon off the airport because there were too many people that wanted to get to him. And he was just like walking along this, like, there was like a fenced off part of the airport, just like waving people, looking a bit sheepish. But like that must happen to him all the time. What an absolute, that must screw with your mind. But it's a strange thing when, you know, I mean I'm going to interview someone soon and they're going to come onto the channel. That'll be brilliant. I mean, I've got loads of interviews coming up. And when I first met him, he said, I've listened to so many podcasts, I feel like I know you already. So it is a strange thing, but like it's a nice thing, but it is a little bit odd. But I think the community that I have now is reflective of the broad reality that few people who know about this case now will steadfastly believe that Lucy's guilty. The vast majority now know that this is an extremely unsafe conviction. And as I mentioned earlier, and as I've been talking about in this podcast, I think most of those that don't are the sort that have an unshakable faith in the system, despite all the problems with the system, despite all the historical issues with the system, despite everything I've discussed in this podcast. It's people that just, you've all met them in your lives. They're pretty annoying, but that's just the way some people are. And you know, ultimately they're not going to matter because they'll have to accept that Lucy's not guilty and there is no evidence to point to that, and it's a chronically unsafe conviction and she needs to be exonerated. Having done some of these court transcript videos recently and over the last months, I've personally found the quality of evidence used to convict Lucy to be stupendously poor. You know, it's staggering, really. I wouldn't have believed this possible a couple of years ago when I began this journey of researching this case. I would have thought I can remember what I thought when I started. I thought to put someone away for murder there needs to be pretty significant, strong evidence. I thought you would have needed concrete evidence, to be honest. I wouldn't have thought a circumstantial case would be enough, but obviously, you could say dead bodies on the patio is circumstantial evidence. I would have thought it would need to be very strong circumstantial evidence or concrete evidence. But in actual fact, that's clearly not the case. We know that for a fact. We know from other serious crimes and other serious convictions, the evidence in the Andrew Malkinson case was even weaker. There was no evidence at all. It's unbelievable he served 17 years in prison. And I think the criminal justice system and its inadequacy, its very evident inadequacy, is indicative of the crumbling institutions of this country. So I've been around for long enough that I've seen a massive change in this country in terms of the calibre of the infrastructure and the way things are run. And there is no doubt, and I'm not misty-eyed about the past whatsoever, because when I was growing up, I went to a northern comprehensive school. It was rough. It's not like today where people cared about each other and were sensitive and like, oh, don't discriminate against people because of this. There was brutal racism at that school, like you cannot imagine unless you grew up. I mean, obviously a lot of my listeners are of my generation, they probably can imagine, but it was brutal. And if you stuck out in any way, it's not even so much that people were bullied in a systematic way. It's just people were so hostile. It was an aggressive place. It was a violent place. It was a prejudiced place. It was a bigoted place. It was an impoverished place as well, the town. It was rough and dirty and grimy. It was all of these things. So I'm not misty-eyed about the past at all. But I know for a fact that things like doctor surgeries and the rail system and the way electricity and water was delivered was far better in the past, and it was all run much better than it is now, and people had much more equitable access to these things than they do today, and that is despite the fact there's been enormous technological advancement over that period. And as I say, that's indicative of the crumbling institutions of this country, and there's no better example than the criminal justice system, which is run in this very Victorian fashion with this dated system, and yet enormous and complex technology is put into this system now. So a barrister can call on all kinds of technology and all kinds of technological data and all kinds of technological arguments, but you're still using basically a Victorian system of deciding what happens. It's just woefully inadequate. Now, in that particular area, I don't think the same factors that are inherent in the other crumbling institutions are really the reason. I think there is an unwillingness to reform the criminal justice system, I think for numerous reasons, partly because of the power that's inherent in it, and people don't want to change what's been as they see, working for a long time. I think there are other socio-economic factors that contribute to the other crumbling institutions, but there are massive problems in this country. I've said, and I think most people would be in agreement, of my generation and who are older, that it's in serious decline in many ways. And I think the Lucy Letby case is emblematic of that decline. And I know miscarriages of justice happened in the past, and that's inevitable. But as I say, I think the institutions of the country and the basic infrastructure is in a terrible state at this point in time. It's either declining in quality or it's become inaccessible due to expense, or both. I mean, we're reaching the point now where if you're a poor person, you just cannot travel to London. Maybe you could get a coach, but you can't get a train because it's insane how much it costs. Even I, when I went to London, I really had to wait until 8 o'clock to come back, because if you travel back at 5 p.m, it's insane. And I just thought, well, I'm not paying £250 for one train journey. I mean, I'll wait until 8 o'clock. I'll sit in the station, or I'll do a bit of sightseeing, which I did. But it's just absolutely crazy. And that obviously, trains are supposed to exist so that people who don't have cars can travel places. So it should be affordable and accessible, and it just isn't. And that's one of many problems that exist at this point in time. And I think that's a big part of the kind of dark cloud that hangs over this country at the moment. And the Lucy Letby case is another big part of that dark cloud. But as I say, the silver lining is that there are so many brilliant people that I've come into contact with who do have intelligence, curiosity, kindness and compassion, and who will stick their neck out to do what's right. And these people are winning because we're undoubtedly winning the debate now. That's pretty much over, really. It's now just about making the system accept that it's wrong. This may take longer than people wish, because the system is slow. The Criminal Cases Review Commission isn't fit for purpose. The Court of Appeal is notably dithering in the way that it does things. So it may take a period of time, but I just want people to know that we are winning the debate and the discussion. And there'll probably be peaks and troughs, and it'll probably be a roller coaster, but we are well ahead. And the numbers of people that believe Lucy Letby to be guilty are diminishing, and the proportion of people that believe her to be not guilty are increasing. And among those that believe they're not guilty are a large number now of very credible people. And I'm very fortunate because I'm being connected with so many people all the time now, and I'm going to bring many people onto the channel in the weeks to come. I've got many interviews arranged. These are all with new guests. Some of the guests we've had already are going to make their return as well. But I've got several new interviews coming up, so I'm really excited to... haven't recorded them yet, but once I've recorded them, I'm very excited to share them with you. And I feel very privileged to be able to do that, and to have the platform I have, and to have the support I have, and to be connected with the people I'm being connected with is, again, another reason for me to practice my humility and practice my gratitude. So you may find it aggravating when you see someone on Twitter, or you encounter someone in everyday life perhaps that says or is very adamant that Lucy Letby is guilty, but please be advised that they either don't know anything about the case or they're in the minority. And if you do speak patiently with these people, most of them will start to see, hold on a second, this is not clear cut. And then the more they see it, the more it becomes clear to them that this is an obvious miscarriage of justice and Lucy Letby is innocent. So that's all I have to say in this video. I didn't really plan anything. I just had a vague idea of what I wanted to talk about, and I thought I'll just let myself go where my mouth takes me. So I hope you found it interesting and useful. And I'll look forward. My next video, as I say, will be an interview. It's with someone completely new that you've never heard from before. So I'm really excited to bring that to you. And if you have any queries, comments, questions, observations in the comment section, I always look forward to reading them. And I'll speak to you all soon.